The room was alive with the cheerful sound of children laughing, balloons bouncing around, and the faint aroma of freshly baked cake. It was Emma's 8th birthday, and her mother, Laura, had spent weeks planning every detail. She wanted it to be perfect, despite the limited budget she had as a single mother. However, the atmosphere turned tense when her ex-husband, Mark, arrived uninvited. Laura's heart sank the moment he walked in, his booming voice cutting through the joyous mood. He was loud, brash, and seemed to relish the attention he drew. Mark's presence was always disruptive. As the party progressed, he made passive-aggressive remarks disguised as jokes, loudly pointing out how basic the decorations were and making backhanded comments about Laura's inability to provide better for their daughter. "I guess this is what happens when you rely on a single income," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. His friends, who had tagged along unannounced, laughed loudly, as if they were in on a private joke. When it came time to sing happy birthday, Laura stood close to Emma, her hands trembling as she lit the candles. Mark interrupted the moment, loudly declaring, "I bet she didn't even bake the cake herself." The room grew quiet, with a few parents exchanging awkward glances. Laura felt her face flush with shame but held her composure for Emma's sake. She kissed her daughter on the forehead and encouraged her to blow out the candles, ignoring Mark's taunts. But Mark wasn't finished. As the guests began to leave, he cornered Laura in the kitchen. "It's pathetic, really," he said, his voice low but venomous. "You're just a failure who can't even give our daughter a decent life." Laura bit her lip to hold back tears, determined not to let him ruin the day entirely. As Mark sauntered off, she resolved, for the first time, to prove him wrong in ways he could never anticipate. The guests left, and Laura sat alone at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly around a cup of cold coffee. She glanced at the messy remnants of the party and took a deep breath. It was time to rebuild, not just for her own sake but for Emma's. This humiliation, she decided, would be her starting point. Laura's marriage to Mark hadn't always been filled with contempt. They had once been young and deeply in love, but the cracks began to show as Mark climbed the corporate ladder. His initial ambition, which Laura admired, turned into relentless arrogance. He belittled her contributions to their household, despite her balancing work and raising their child. He dismissed her dreams as unrealistic and treated her sacrifices as obligations rather than acts of love. The divorce had been bitter, leaving Laura to start over with almost nothing. Mark's expensive lawyers ensured he retained most of their shared assets, while Laura got custody of Emma and a modest alimony that barely covered their bills. Still, she cherished the time she had with her daughter, even if it meant working long hours and sacrificing her own comfort. Yet, no matter how much she tried to shield Emma from Mark's negativity, his words lingered in the air like an open wound. Every family gathering or shared event with Mark felt like a battle Laura was destined to lose. He would arrive impeccably dressed, with gifts far more extravagant than Laura could afford, and make sure everyone noticed. "A little something for my princess," he'd say, casting a sly glance in Laura's direction. It was clear he wanted Emma's affection to tip in his favor, leaving Laura feeling like an afterthought in her own daughter's life. Long before Mark entered her life, Laura had grown up in a small town where dreams were often traded for practicality. Her parents were hardworking but struggled to make ends meet, instilling in her the importance of perseverance. She worked multiple part-time jobs through college, often spending late nights studying at her kitchen table under the dim light of a thrift store lamp. It was during this time that she discovered her passion for interior design, a field she could never afford to pursue full-time. After the divorce, Laura found herself relying on those same survival skills to keep her and Emma afloat. Their small apartment was cozy but humble, a stark contrast to the lavish lifestyle Mark paraded. Yet, Laura found solace in transforming their modest home into a warm and inviting space. Friends often complimented her knack for creating beauty out of simplicity, though it was a talent she rarely thought of as anything more than a necessity. One evening, while tucking Emma into bed, Laura noticed her daughter's growing fascination with her makeshift design projects. Emma's wide-eyed curiosity as she watched her mother repurpose old furniture sparked an idea. "What if I could turn this into something more?" Laura whispered to herself. It was a fleeting thought, but it planted a seed of hope. Perhaps she could build something meaningful, not just for her family, but for herself. Laura had held on to her marriage longer than she should have, clinging to the belief that Mark's arrogance and disdain were temporary. She thought perhaps a promotion or a shift in priorities would soften his sharp edges. But his success only seemed to fuel his disdain. He would come home late, throwing his jacket onto the nearest chair, scoffing at the simple dinners she prepared. "Is this the best you could do?" he would mutter under his breath, his disappointment palpable. Arguments became routine, with Mark dismissing her as ungrateful whenever she voiced her frustrations. His words were daggers, each one chipping away at her confidence. "You're lucky I'm around to take care of you," he'd sneer, conveniently forgetting that Laura had sacrificed her career ambitions to raise Emma and support his rise in the corporate world. She often stayed awake long after their fights, staring at the ceiling and wondering where things had gone wrong. The final straw came on their 10th wedding anniversary. Mark had promised to come home early for a quiet family dinner but instead arrived hours late, reeking of cologne that wasn't his. Laura didn't bother asking for an explanation. She knew. It was in that moment she realized she wasn't just unloved, she was unseen. Filing for divorce was terrifying, but staying in a marriage that drained her spirit was worse. Life as a single mother was a series of small battles. Every morning began with the same routine, getting Emma ready for school, rushing to her office job, and returning home late to cook dinner. The days felt endless, blending into a blur of exhaustion. The weekends weren't much better. While Mark took Emma for extravagant outings, Laura spent her time cleaning and catching up on bills. Yet, through the chaos, she found moments of peace in Emma's laughter and the quiet pride of making it on her own. Her social life dwindled as she poured every ounce of energy into survival. Old friends stopped calling, either out of pity or the awkwardness of navigating her new life. Laura didn't mind. She had Emma, and that was enough. Together, they made do with second-hand clothes and DIY projects. Still, the shadow of Mark's judgment loomed over her. His condescending remarks during shared custody exchanges made her doubt herself, though she never let him see her cry. One evening, after Emma had gone to bed, Laura sat down with her worn-out laptop and began researching small business ideas. Her love for design resurfaced as she scrolled through websites showcasing handmade crafts and home makeovers. The thought of starting something felt impossible, but as she looked around her modest apartment filled with her creative touches, she began to wonder, could this be the key to reclaiming her life? In a small town like theirs, whispers traveled faster than the wind. Laura had grown accustomed to the subtle glances and half-smiles from other parents at school events. Everyone knew about her divorce, and while some pitied her, others judged her. She used to have it all, someone had once muttered at a PTA meeting, loud enough for her to hear. Her relationship with her neighbors was cordial but distant. While she'd always been friendly, the strain of single motherhood left little time for casual conversations. One day, after an especially grueling shift at work, Laura came home to find Mrs. Keene, an elderly neighbor, waiting by her door. "I've been meaning to tell you," Mrs. Keene began, holding up a small cushion Laura had designed for her as a favor. "You have a gift, my dear. You should do something with it. Laura smiled politely, but the words stuck with her. Over the next few weeks, she noticed subtle changes in how people interacted with her. A parent complimented her daughter's birthday decorations. A colleague asked for advice on redecorating her living room. Slowly, Laura began to realize that while the world saw her as a struggling single mom, they also saw her creativity and resilience. Laura's breakthrough came unexpectedly during a routine school event. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Wallace, approached Laura with a request. "I heard you're quite talented with interiors," she said, holding a clipboard. "Would you be interested in helping us redesign the school's reading nook? It's a mess, but I think you could bring it to life." Flustered, Laura hesitated. She had no formal training and barely enough time to keep up with her own life. But Mrs. Wallace's enthusiasm was contagious. "It doesn't have to be perfect," she assured. "We're just looking for someone who can make the space feel warm and inviting for the kids." Laura spent the next 2 weekends transforming the cluttered corner into a cozy retreat with handmade cushions, whimsical lighting, and colorful shelves. The response was overwhelming. Parents and teachers alike praised her work, and the local newspaper even featured a short article on the project. For the first time in years, Laura felt a spark of confidence. The Reading Nook project reignited something in Laura she thought she had lost, a sense of purpose. Sitting at her kitchen table one night, surrounded by sketches and fabric swatches, she began brainstorming ways to turn her passion into a sustainable venture. The idea of starting a business was daunting, but the thought of spending her life in an unfulfilling job was worse. She decided to start small, creating custom home decor pieces and offering redesign services to friends and neighbors. Her first project was for Mrs. Keene, who insisted on paying despite Laura's protests. "This is your work," Mrs. Keene said firmly. "You deserve to be compensated." Encouraged by the positive feedback, Laura began promoting her services through word of mouth and social media. Her first few clients were hesitant, unsure of hiring someone without formal qualifications. But Laura's talent spoke for itself. Each project brought new opportunities, and soon her calendar was filled with requests. With every piece she created, she felt a step closer to proving Mark and herself wrong. Starting a business with no savings was like building a house on shifting sand. Laura quickly realized that passion alone wasn't enough to sustain her venture. There were late nights spent watching online tutorials about accounting and marketing, and days juggling client deadlines with her office job. Every penny earned went back into the business, buying better tools, higher quality materials, and upgrading her old laptop. Her small apartment became a makeshift workshop, with fabrics draped over chairs and paint samples scattered across the floor. Emma watched with fascination, often helping her mother sort supplies or organize sketches. "You're amazing, Mom," Emma would say, her wide-eyed admiration a balm for Laura's exhaustion. But the challenges were unrelenting. There were days when orders fell through, materials arrived damaged, or unexpected bills drained her modest income. The hardest blow came when her largest project, a full living room redesign, was abruptly canceled by a client who claimed her work was too amateur. Laura spent hours questioning her abilities, wondering if she'd made a mistake by pursuing something so uncertain. But as she lay awake that night, she glanced at Emma sleeping soundly and knew giving up wasn't an option. She resolved to approach her business the same way she approached life, with grit and determination. One evening, while scrolling through a local business forum, Laura came across a post from a boutique furniture store looking for local artists to feature. The shop's owner, Amelia, was known for championing small businesses and curating unique, handcrafted items. On impulse, Laura submitted her portfolio, a collection of photos showcasing her best work, from reupholstered chairs to hand-painted wall decor. 2 days later, she received an email. "Your work is stunning," Amelia had written. "We'd love to feature a few of your pieces in our store." Laura felt an overwhelming mix of excitement and nerves as she prepared for her first meeting with Amelia. When she entered the store, the sight of her creations displayed alongside high-end furniture brought tears to her eyes. Sales were slow at first, but Amelia's support gave Laura a newfound confidence. She began receiving inquiries from customers who had seen her work in the store, and word of her talent started to spread. For the first time, Laura allowed herself to dream about the possibility of a full-time career in design. Laura's business grew slowly but steadily. Each new project brought not only income but also invaluable experience. She learned to negotiate contracts, manage deadlines, and market herself effectively. One day, a local cafe owner approached her with an ambitious request: redesign the entire space to attract a younger crowd. The cafe project pushed Laura out of her comfort zone. With limited resources, she transformed the dull interior into a vibrant, Instagram-worthy haven with colorful murals, mismatched vintage furniture, and custom lighting fixtures. The cafe's grand reopening drew a crowd, and Laura's work became the talk of the town. For every success, there were setbacks. A shipment of chairs once arrived broken just days before a client's deadline, forcing Laura to scramble for replacements. Another time, a payment dispute left her temporarily unable to afford supplies. But through every challenge, Laura persevered, driven by the knowledge that each small victory was building something bigger than herself. Laura's turning point came when a prominent interior design blogger visited the cafe she had redesigned. Impressed by her work, the blogger featured it in a glowing article, describing Laura's ability to create beauty from simplicity. Overnight, her social media following tripled, and her inbox was flooded with inquiries. The attention was both exhilarating and overwhelming. She found herself juggling multiple projects at once, often working late into the night. But as the orders and opportunities grew, so did her confidence. For the first time in years, Laura felt like she was regaining control of her life. Her success wasn't lost on Emma, who proudly told her classmates, "My mom is an artist." The look of admiration in Emma's eyes reminded Laura of why she had started this journey. She wasn't just proving Mark wrong, she was showing her daughter what resilience looked like. Emma had always been Laura's biggest supporter, but as she grew older, her admiration became more vocal. At a school assembly where parents were invited to talk about their careers, Emma insisted Laura speak. Nervously, Laura stood before the crowd, sharing her story of starting from scratch and building a business out of sheer determination. To her surprise, the room erupted in applause. Parents approached her afterward, asking for advice and offering encouragement. Emma beamed with pride, her small hand clutching Laura's as they walked home. "You're the coolest mom ever," Emma declared, her voice full of conviction. That moment solidified Laura's belief that she wasn't just rebuilding her own life, she was shaping Emma's future. She wanted her daughter to see that strength came not from avoiding challenges but from facing them head-on. Mark's once flawless facade began to crack as his professional life took an unexpected downturn. A risky investment led to significant losses, and whispers of his arrogance and unethical decisions began circulating in his company. While Mark struggled to maintain his image, Laura's business was flourishing, though she kept her success quiet during their brief interactions. During one of Mark's custody visits, Emma proudly showed him an article featuring Laura's cafe project. "Mom's work is famous," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. Mark barely glanced at the article, muttering something dismissive before changing the subject. But Laura noticed the flicker of unease in his expression, a sign that the tables were beginning to turn. Emma's academic achievements brought the family together at a school event. Her acceptance into the gifted program was being celebrated, and both Laura and Mark were invited. Laura arrived early, wearing a simple yet elegant outfit she had pieced together from her favorite thrift store finds. The auditorium buzzed with excitement as parents exchanged pleasantries. Mark entered the room moments before the event began, his usual confident stride slightly subdued. He looked around, searching for Emma, and when he spotted Laura, his expression hardened. "Still pretending to be something you're not?" he whispered as he passed her. Laura ignored the jab, focusing on Emma, who was beaming on stage as the principal announced her achievements. When Emma stepped up to the microphone to thank her parents, her words caught Mark off guard. "I want to thank my mom for showing me how to work hard and believe in myself," she said, her voice steady and proud. "She's the strongest person I know." The applause was thunderous, and Laura felt tears welling up as she exchanged a brief glance with Mark. For the first time, his smug exterior seemed to falter. After the event, a group of parents approached Laura, congratulating her on Emma's speech and asking about her business. Mark stood nearby, overhearing the compliments. "I didn't know you were an entrepreneur," one parent said, genuinely impressed. Laura smiled humbly and shared a few details about her work, downplaying her accomplishments but unable to hide her pride. Mark interjected, his tone sharp. "It's not as glamorous as she's making it sound," he scoffed. "It's just a hobby she stumbled into." The group fell silent, uncomfortable with his hostility. One of the parents, who had seen Laura's designs in Amelia's boutique, quickly came to her defense. "If it's just a hobby, it's an incredibly successful one. Your work is remarkable, Laura." Laura's heart raced, but she maintained her composure. "Thank you," she replied, meeting Mark's glare with quiet confidence. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't shrinking under his judgment. Instead, she was standing tall, proud of what she had built. A month later, Emma was invited to speak at a regional student conference, representing her school. The topic was resilience, and Emma's speech centered on her mother's journey. "My mom taught me that setbacks aren't the end," she said, her voice echoing through the auditorium. "They're just the beginning of something greater." Laura sat in the audience, her heart swelling with pride. The speech was deeply personal, detailing moments of struggle and triumph that Emma had witnessed firsthand. "She showed me that no matter how hard things get, you can always find a way forward," Emma concluded, earning a standing ovation. Mark, who had reluctantly attended, sat motionless as the applause thundered around him. He hadn't anticipated the impact of hearing his daughter speak so openly about Laura's strength. For the first time, he seemed to grasp just how much his ex-wife had accomplished without him. The conference ended with a small reception, and Laura found herself face-to-face with Mark. His usual smugness was replaced by an unfamiliar hesitance. Emma's speech was surprising, he began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. Laura nodded politely, waiting for him to continue. "I didn't realize how much she looks up to you," he admitted, avoiding her gaze. "You've done well, I'll give you that." The words were faintly begrudging but unmistakably sincere. For a moment, Laura saw a flicker of the man she had once loved, buried beneath years of arrogance and resentment. "Thank you," Laura said simply, her tone even. She felt no need to elaborate or seek validation. Her life was no longer defined by his approval, and for the first time, she felt free of his shadow. Laura's work continued to gain recognition, and one day she was invited to speak at a local entrepreneurs panel. The event was held at the town hall and attended by a mix of community leaders, small business owners, and aspiring entrepreneurs. Laura shared her story, emphasizing the importance of resilience, creativity, and hard work. Mark attended, though he stayed in the back of the room, blending into the crowd. He watched as Laura captivated the audience, her poise and eloquence a stark contrast to the woman he had once belittled. When the panel ended, attendees lined up to shake her hand and ask for advice. As the crowd thinned, Mark approached cautiously. "You were impressive," he said, his voice almost inaudible. Laura smiled politely, thanking him before turning her attention back to a group of admirers. For the first time, Mark realized she no longer needed his validation. She had built something far greater than he ever imagined. A few months later, Laura received an invitation to participate in a high-profile home design competition. The event was televised, and the winner would receive a significant cash prize and a feature in a prominent design magazine. Though nervous, Laura accepted, determined to challenge herself. The competition was grueling, with contestants tasked with redesigning spaces under tight deadlines and limited budgets. Laura's creativity and resourcefulness shone, earning her praise from the judges and fellow competitors. When the winner was announced, Laura's name echoed through the hall. She stood on the stage, holding her trophy, as the audience erupted in applause. Watching from home, Mark felt a pang of regret. He had spent years underestimating Laura, but now the world could see what he had failed to recognize. Meanwhile, Laura celebrated her victory with Emma, who proudly declared, "Mom, you're unstoppable." The win at the design competition catapulted Laura's business into new territory. Her email inbox overflowed with inquiries from potential clients, and her social media following grew exponentially. But Laura remained grounded, refusing to let the success change her. She continued to work from her small apartment, making time to volunteer at Emma's school and offering mentorship to other single mothers trying to start businesses of their own. Mark, meanwhile, was struggling to come to terms with the shift in dynamics. At a school fundraiser, he overheard a group of parents discussing Laura's recent achievements. "She's such an inspiration," one mother gushed. "I don't know how she balances it all." Mark stood on the sidelines, a spectator to the admiration Laura now commanded. When Laura arrived to drop off baked goods for the fundraiser, she was greeted warmly by the other parents. Mark approached her hesitantly, but instead of trying to undermine her as he had in the past, he simply said, "Emma's lucky to have you." The comment surprised Laura, but she responded with a gracious smile, choosing to rise above the years of animosity. One quiet evening, Laura and Emma sat on the couch, flipping through a scrapbook Emma had started as a school project. It was filled with photos of Laura's work, newspaper clippings, and even a small ribbon Emma had made to commemorate her mother's competition win. "This is my favorite page," Emma said, pointing to a photo of the two of them standing in front of the redesigned cafe. Laura felt a lump in her throat as she listened to Emma talk about how much her mother's journey had inspired her. "You taught me that no matter what people say, you can still do great things," Emma said. "I want to be just like you when I grow up." The words stayed with Laura long after Emma went to bed. It wasn't just about proving Mark wrong anymore, it was about showing her daughter the power of perseverance and the value of self-worth. Mark's fortunes continued to decline. The company he had worked so hard to climb through was downsizing, and his position was eliminated. For the first time in decades, he was jobless, his reputation as a brash and difficult manager preceding him. As he struggled to rebuild, he couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had brought him to this point. One evening, after dropping Emma off at Laura's apartment, Mark lingered at the door. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, his tone unusually humble. Laura hesitated before stepping into the hallway. Mark fidgeted, searching for the right words. "I've made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't appreciate you the way I should have. And I see now how wrong I was." Laura listened silently, unsure of how to respond. She didn't feel anger or satisfaction, only a quiet sense of closure. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "But the past is the past. I've moved on, and I think you should too." Mark nodded, his shoulders slumping as he walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward letting go. A few weeks later, Laura found an envelope tucked into Emma's backpack. It was addressed to her in Mark's handwriting. Inside was a heartfelt letter, detailing his regrets and apologizing for the pain he had caused during their marriage. He wrote about how he had underestimated her and how much he admired the life she had built for herself and Emma. Laura read the first few lines before setting the letter aside. She wasn't ready to revisit those memories, nor did she need Mark's validation anymore. She placed the letter in a drawer, unopened, not out of spite but because she had already made peace with the past. Her life wasn't defined by his actions or apologies, it was defined by the strength she had found within herself. The turning point for their fractured relationship came at a family reunion hosted by Mark's mother. Laura was hesitant to attend, but Emma insisted. "Grandma wants us there," she said. "It'll be fun, Mom." Reluctantly, Laura agreed, arriving at the sprawling suburban home with Emma by her side. Mark was there, quieter than usual, but Laura noticed his genuine efforts to mend fences. He stayed close to Emma, helping her connect with relatives she rarely saw, and even struck up a polite conversation with Laura. "Thank you for coming," he said sincerely. Laura nodded, appreciating the change in his demeanor. As the day unfolded, Laura felt a subtle shift in their dynamic. They weren't friends, but they were no longer adversaries. For Emma's sake, they found common ground, setting aside their history to focus on the future. Months later, at another school event, Laura stood before a packed auditorium as a guest speaker. She shared her journey of rebuilding her life, emphasizing the importance of resilience and community. As she spoke, she noticed Mark in the audience, his expression a mix of pride and regret. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Emma hugged her tightly, whispering, "You're amazing, Mom." For the first time, Laura felt completely at peace with her story. She had turned her pain into purpose, her struggles into strength, and her past into a stepping stone for the future. As Laura descended from the stage after her speech, Emma was waiting for her with a bouquet of wildflowers she had picked earlier that day. "These are for you, Mom," Emma said, beaming with pride. Laura knelt to accept the flowers, her eyes filling with tears. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered, holding Emma close. The two walked together to the refreshment area, where parents and teachers approached to compliment Laura on her speech. Emma stood beside her, smiling proudly as she listened to the praise. "She's my hero," Emma said at one point, loud enough for Laura to hear. The words were simple, but they resonated deeply. For Laura, this moment was more meaningful than any business award or public recognition. Mark, who had watched the entire scene from a distance, finally approached. "Emma's right," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "You've done something incredible, not just for her, but for yourself." Laura smiled, appreciating the sincerity in his words. Though she no longer sought his approval, it felt good to know that he finally understood her worth. Mark's life continued to unravel as he struggled to find stable work. However, the humility brought by his challenges began to change him. He started taking on smaller roles in his field, working to rebuild his reputation from the ground up. During one of his custody weekends, he confided in Emma about his struggles. "Dad, you always told me to be strong," Emma said, her young wisdom catching him off guard. "But Mom taught me that strength doesn't mean pretending everything is fine. It means working hard, even when it's tough." Her words stuck with him, and over time, he began taking steps to be more involved and supportive, not just for Emma, but for Laura as well. One day, he surprised Laura by offering to help with a redesign project at Emma's school. "I can't decorate, but I can carry heavy stuff," he joked awkwardly. Laura accepted his help, and though their conversations were brief, they were cordial. Slowly, a sense of mutual respect began to replace the bitterness that had once defined their relationship. With her business thriving, Laura finally saved enough to move into a new home. It was modest but spacious, with a small garden Emma immediately fell in love with. As they unpacked boxes and arranged furniture, Emma declared the house perfect. For Laura, it represented more than just a new address. It was a symbol of her journey from survival to stability. As her business grew, Laura began giving back to the community that had supported her. She hosted free workshops for aspiring designers, volunteered at Emma's school, and donated a portion of her earnings to local charities. Her story became a source of inspiration for women in similar situations, and she often received letters from strangers thanking her for showing them that reinvention was possible. At one of her workshops, a young single mother approached Laura with tears in her eyes. "You don't know me," she said, "but your story saved me. I was ready to give up until I read about you." Laura hugged her tightly, moved by the realization that her journey had rippled beyond her own life. One sunny afternoon, Laura sat in the garden, sipping tea as Emma played with the neighbor's dog. The air was warm, filled with the hum of bees and the distant sound of children laughing. Laura reflected on how far she had come, from the humiliation of that birthday party to the quiet triumphs that now defined her life. Mark stopped by to drop off a book Emma had left at his house. He stood at the garden gate, looking around at the flourishing flowers and the freshly painted shutters. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, his tone genuine. Laura nodded, her smile serene. "It wasn't easy, but it was worth it." As Emma ran over to hug her father, Laura watched them with a peaceful heart. The bitterness of the past had been replaced by acceptance, and she no longer carried the weight of Mark's judgment. Her life was her own now, a testament to resilience, courage, and the power of self-belief. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the garden, Laura knew she had found her true strength, not in proving Mark wrong, but in proving to herself that she could thrive.